Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And now it's time for our final list, the top 25 albums of 2016. And now, the last one, the one that always gives me the most anxiety, but also the one that I'm always happy to have finalized by the end of the year, or the first few days of the next year. I'm going on vacation for the first week of January. I'm in a bit of a rush to get packed and get ready on time, so this video might be a day or two into January, but hey, that happens. But in an odd way, that whole thing, it's kind of representative of 2016's albums as a whole, as I've definitely not seen a lot of common consensus surrounding the overall picks. And fair warning, that'll be very, very true with these as well. Great records in 2016 came in fits and spurts without a lot of consensus, with a lot of big returns that didn't quite impress me, some debuts that blew me out of the water, and a predominant theme of endings that ran through a lot of records that I covered and loved in 2016. I'm not quite sure if it's reflecting the tempo of the times or my own personal feelings surrounding the year, but this list really does feel all over the place. All albums that I loved, but coming from radically different locations, styles, and genres than I expected, and most with a profound mood of discontent and uncertainty. In other words, there are albums that you probably will not recognize on this list, and a few major exclusions that, I'm not going to get into. But it also runs deeper than that. For instance, this is the first year that I've ever given out a perfect score on this channel. And then I did it again. I'll get more into this when I talk about the albums at length here, but I would recommend you consider my top two choices as kind of interchangeable at best. I flip back and forth with them on every day, pretty much every hour. There's also a whole bunch of albums that narrowly missed the cut that I want to call out here, like punk veterans like Against Me, White Lung, and Jeff Rosenstock, to metal and experimental rock like Swan, Savages, Epica, and Taria, to hip-hop powerhouses like Clipping, Ka, LMNO, Elzai, and Denzel Curry. And as I have mentioned a number of times, country music had one of its best years in recent memory, and while there's a lot on this list, it did lead to some extremely painful cuts. From the superb pop country of Jennifer Nettles, to the neo-traditional tones of Cody Jinks and Mark Chestnut, to the very stripped-back indie starlets like Karen Jonas and Dory Freeman. Now, everybody I just mentioned dropped albums this year that you can occasionally consider honorable mentions that I couldn't rank even if I wanted to, and are all definitely worth your time. But now it's time to start off with the list proper, starting with number 25. Now we're starting off this list with hip-hop, which despite the mainstream's fumbling to the contrary, actually had a pretty decent year. I wouldn't say it's a banner year like country had, but in terms of fresh talent, experimentation, and old pros coming back strong, we got a lot of quality that should definitely be appreciated. This record falls most into the last category, and it's one of those cases that I think end up loving this album so much more than everybody else, simply because the themes had so much more powerful resonance with me. But as long as this got made, I am so happy that we got it.
Next stop, NYC, take your seats please. I know exactly where you're going, I can see it on your face. I know how to get there, and I'll give you my word that I'll get you there safe. I don't need to check your baggage, I don't need to know your name. All I need to know is, by the time you arrive, you'll forever be changed.
Again, in a strange way, I totally get why so many hip-hop heads didn't really get behind And the Anonymous Nobody. For as much as De La Soul have been pushing boundaries in sound and hip-hop since their inception, this is one of those projects that seemed too weird, featuring less rap verses and an overload of guest stars that didn't seem to make a lot of sense. From Snoop Dogg and Pete Rock to Estelle and Usher to 2 Chainz, Justin Hawkins of the Darkins, and David Byrne. And yet, once I managed to decode the thematic arc, I love this album. It's a wonky, oddball record about the relationship of artists to their music as they see through the metaphorical genre apocalypse, and yet find the whole package waiting on the other side. Not saviors of the genre, but common contributors. Speaking from the masses with the populism and power that have made De La Soul among my favorite hip-hop groups of all time. It's high-concept genius, and easily one of the best rap records of this year, so worth the time to entangle. If you brush this off, definitely fix that. It's excellent. Number 24. And from Transcendence, we crash into the gutter in epic fashion. Because there's the side of hip-hop experimentation that celebrates the genre to elevate it, and then there's the sort that will burn it, the artist, and everyone else in its path. And of course, it's on this list.
Funny how it happened, whoever would imagine that joke's on you, but ain't no one laughing. Ain't it funny how it happens? Ain't it funny how it happens?
I'll say this outright, if your record manages to give me nightmares, it's got a major chance of making my list. And just like the Flaming Lips did with The Terror in 2013, Danny Brown did with Atrocity Exhibition in 2016. This is a record that takes rock star opulence and merges it with the most hellish drug trip since Requiem for a Dream. And yet, unlike that movie that I've refused to watch again, you just can't look away from Danny Brown on this. The experimental production, courtesy mostly of Paul White, who of course we'll be seeing more on this list, pulls Danny Brown through a funhouse stream of mirrors who sees his sanity collapsing in a haze of hedonistic overload, and yet the relentless stream of dark humor, blistering insight, and over-the-top white-knuckle bars holds through the crash and comes out all the stronger. I was originally not quite as high on this album as a bunch of other critics, but like the substances used and so heavily abused on this album, I just kept coming back for more. I couldn't get enough of it. It's a terrific album, although I really do hope this was the project that Danny Brown needed to get this out of his system. He's too talented to lose like this. Number 23. So okay, let's not mince words. Women in Country had an excellent year, both in the mainstream and the indie scene. Now this record tilts more towards the former courtesy of a lot of its production, but it also fell through the cracks for a lot of people because in 2016, most more conservative country stations weren't willing to hear this sort of brutal honesty, even though it was a far more empathetic picture than you might think. Of course, this is nothing new for this artist. She just got the production to match the scope of her words this time around, and it was well worth it.
So if you want the girl next door, some Virgin Mary metaphor, your cardboard cutout on the wall, your paper or your Barbie doll with perfect hair and a perfect dress, I'm really just the perfect mess.
So for the longest time, this record was paired in my mind with Jennifer Nettles' Playing with Fire, and considering Brandy Clark co-wrote the majority of that album, it's no surprise that this rings at the much darker side of the coin, to that album's feeling of hope to turn all the polish into something more real. But as the year progressed, on the strength of stronger individual songs and a black comedy that underscores so many of these tunes, Brandy Clark just pulled ahead. Her stories about women in small-town America pulled no punches and took its fair share of them regardless. And while Jay Joyce couldn't quite capture all the rougher textures that Dave Cobb would manage so brilliantly, that's no surprise, of course we're getting to him later, Jay Joyce proved up to the task here. He did a really good job. Eclectic and diverse without losing its cohesion, relentlessly witty while never losing its populism. It might be a shade weaker than her debut album 12 Stories from 2013 that I absolutely love, but that doesn't make this any less excellent. In other words, there's a reason Brandy Clark has been pulling in the critical acclaim, especially this year. She deserves it. Number 22. This is a very late entry onto the list, but the more times I listened to it, the more it fit. It was a return to form I don't think anybody saw coming, with sort of brilliantly refined compositions with the gravitas and the writing and delivery to earn them. And for somebody who has never really been a fan of this artist, she managed to capture a magic that inspired memories I didn't know I had. In other words,
Who's the winner? Not the roses, not the buyers, not the sellers, not the tellers of these stories, not the fathers, not their children, not those walking on a dark night through a memory they're forgetting. Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Maybe winter, maybe winter.
no joke, I did not think Regina Spektor could pull this off, because there was a weight and maturity to the writing on this record that her progression over the past couple of albums, the past decade really, did not see. Most of this is a factor of the heavier, richer, more orchestral production, but a big factor is that she dialed back the insufferable quirkiness in favor of insightful songwriting about the nature of time's passage, from lost old devils and obsolescence to an increasingly uncertain and bleak-looking future. And yet, this is not an album that falls into nostalgia or depression or nihilism, but simply finding the maturity in that middle path, acknowledging time's flow around you, your own choices within it, and savoring the connections that transcend time. I'm not going to deny this record picked up a bit of additional personal weight for me, given Regina Spektor's odd connection to my past. See the review for more details about that, it's a bit of a long story, but yeah, it worked, and she ended up delivering one of the most sumptuous releases of the year. If you haven't checked it out, you definitely should. It's great. Number 21. I thought this record would end up being lower than it ultimately is. And again, that's not because of the album itself, but overriding circumstances surrounding the year. After all, it's one thing to make a relentless, uncompromising satire of ego and fragile arrogance, but it's very much another to see it prosper, and it can leave kind of a very bitter taste in your mouth when you realize realized the fallout has the potential to be a lot more self-destructive than this time around and affect a lot more people. But on the other hand, that's being unfair to a damn great album, especially when it provides the blueprint to how the degeneration is going to happen in real time. So yeah, I stand by the fact this album was ignored by too many people upon its release. A lot of people thought Congos were a one-trick pony after Come With Me Now, but with Egomaniac, they not only show themselves as being more experimental than many modern alt-rock acts, but also far more ambitious. Beyond phenomenal instrumental dynamics and the willingness to bend genres until they snap, Congos didn't just bring relentlessly catchy hooks, but also sort of blistering satire of egomania that's framed, well, entirely too close for comfort. It's a record of monstrous hubris that spends its runtime ripping out its own insides, revealing the depths of insecurity, grief, and empty convictions that cannot be sustained, no matter if you have all the privilege in the world. And when the story does crash and crash hard, the album pulls no punches in its conclusion with the frank admission that, no, you're not getting the chance to do it all over again, because that's not how time and life work. It's an utterly brutal album, and yes, I can definitely see why it might be a little harder to stomach given what happened in 2016, but hey, if you want a glimpse inside of that mind, Congos did it better than anybody else with some excellent rock music to boot. Definitely check this out if you've ignored it, it's awesome. Number 20. This is a different and difficult album to discuss. And again, I mean that in every sense of the word, and not just because the artist passed away days after the album was released, a thought that still sends chills down my spine to this day right now. No, the larger factor is that not only did he seem to know that this was coming, but the tangled mysteries of his final album delved into those complex emotions at that impending end, and the ideas in a way that raised so many more questions with every single listen. And yeah, it's no surprise this is here. You all know what this is.
Look up here, I'm in heaven. I've got scars that can't be seen. I've got drama, can't be stolen. Everybody knows me now.
This record confuses, frustrates, and yet blows me away every time I listen to it. The touches of experimental rock with fragments of jazz and an implacable, moody atmosphere that can't help but inspire chills, with David Bowie's haggard voice echoing and breaking into the deep, the morbid fascination with being the dead man walking, and yet the lingering regret at not being able to go further, the inscrutable genius wishing to have just a little more time so he could give it all away. It's not a record I find myself revisiting very often, between the themes, the bizarre lyrical twists that recall a lot of death grips and more, and the fact that it still manages to kind of get to me even with some distance from the event. Whenever I do though, I'm all the more convinced of its value, and that's one of the best albums this year. Very few artists get to write their own coda, and this one, The Black Star, it simply ascended and transcended. Number 19. This was the sort of debut that deserved so much more attention than it got. Yeah, synthpop wasn't really huge in 2016, but when I saw people going crazy for a collection of Carly Rae Jepsen B-sides, a project I did like for the record, it just gave me the sinking feeling that this ended up getting overlooked. Spoilers, it shouldn't have.
I see my heartbeat inside a television screen. My body's not connected now.
But again, look, in a strange way I get it. Sure as Nothing's Real is a subtle, quieter album that calls back to 80s pop and R&B, but not the flashier stuff, not the epic sounding stuff or the big stuff. It's easy to see why a lot of people would overlook it. But it's not really something I can excuse either, because the emotional complexity, the fantastic hooks, the layered production, and Shure's potent, understated charisma is something that has kept drawing me back more and more all the time. And that's before you get into the writing that delves into the quiet desperation of trying to hold on on to those ephemeral connections, be they relationships for all the wrong reasons or family that are bound to depart this world like everybody else. But for as gauzy and uncertain as this album can feel, it taps into a certain real humanity that makes it fantastic synth pop and one of the best pop albums of 2016. Seriously folks, Shura is the real deal, and I'd love to see her get the attention that she so rightly deserves. So yeah, check this out. Number 18. Okay, so one little thought experiment that I like to do whenever I make a list like this is wonder what this collection of albums taken in aggregate says about my year. Now, it's always a hazy proposition. The records exist as part of the culture and not just for me, and there's probably more of a correlation between cultural moods that would impact me rather than any one specific album. But what I do see when I look at this list is a lot of desperation, change, endings, death, confusion. It would be enough for a lot of armchair psychologists to start asking some questions. But here's my counterpoint. If the breakdown is going to be this compelling, how can I not praise it?
We are just teens of style. Oh, we are just teens of style.
Okay, yeah, nearly every critic has put this record somewhere on their list, and that does not surprise me at all, because Will Toledo pulled off something masterful with this album. He didn't just capture the teenage angst with the overwritten, hook-driven indie rock and emo sound that many millennials grew up with and, yeah, adore, but he went deeper to skewer himself, the demographic, and older demographics and generations that enabled this breakdown, and he did it with the attention to detail and edge that shows a songwriter that doesn't just understand and relate to our generation, but has lived it with the self-awareness of all its flaws and yet all its glories. In short, it kind of reminds me a little bit of that movie Superbad from I think 2007, which I probably like a lot more than I should. It's self-indulgent, a little overlong, entirely too crass for its own good, but there's a real emotional core, sincerity, and power to it that will ensure that it remains a classic. Yes, I just called Superbad a classic, and I stand by that. Deal with it. Number 17. Of course, it isn't all about my generation. Sometimes you need the words of those who came before to set the stage and prove that not only can they hold their own, they can surpass it. Yeah, here's another album that grew on me a lot since I covered it. I originally thought I loved the De La Soul comeback a lot more, but I know, the more I dug into A Tribe Called Quest's final record, the more I found an album that just as thoughtful, just as experimental, but a shade more grit and character that put it over the top for me. The rapping interplay is masterful and makes it look easy. The content is hard-hitting and extremely relevant in a way that few political records managed to execute this year, and the pivot to a phenomenally poignant and well-realized tribute to the late Phife Dawg marks some of Tribe's best ever work. I keep finding more moments of genius every time I go back through this album, from guest performances to Busta Rhymes hitting his stride masterfully on his verses, to the fact that the group doesn't just celebrate and reassert their justly deserved dominance, but shows how younger MCs are indeed taking up the torch and brought a bunch of them on for guest stars. Look, if you love hip-hop, you probably already heard all this, you probably love it as much as I do, if not more, and again, what a way to go. And if you haven't heard it, what are you waiting for? Check it out, it's awesome. Number 16. Okay, so one thing that some of you might not recognize is that there aren't many metal albums on this list this year. And yeah, part of that's on me. I don't think I covered as many as I would have liked, but the larger truth is that there were some really big disappointments this year in metal that didn't help matters. I wasn't in love with Metallica's comeback, especially not Megadeth's comeback. Dream Theater's double disc epic fades more every single day for me, and even some of the metal records that I really liked didn't hit as strongly as their predecessors did, like with Epica or Opeth, to the extent you call Opeth metal these days, which is an entire different animal. But that's not saying there weren't a few surprises, and here's one of the biggest. You know, I was never a big Avantasia fan, but man, Ghostlights won me over in a huge way. The narrative rises among to the best of symphonic metal, the vocal performances are tremendous, the solos are excellent, and it's easily some of the most catchy, hook-driven music you will hear all year. This can compete with pop. It's the sort of metal that, yeah, can get gloriously cheesy at points. I mean, it's a conflict in Victorian England between reason and magic. The only thing it's missing are a set of over-the-top steampunk music videos. In fact, that needs to happen. Why hasn't that happened yet? But just like the meatloaf that this album clearly worships, Tobias Sammet knows how to transcend it and make something that's so glorious and epic. Folks, if you're looking for symphonic metal, not just with the brain, but with the sort of power that keeps you coming back over and over, this album, definitely it. You know, I'm gonna stand by it. It's Ayreon for symphonic metal, and for me, that's a high compliment indeed. Number 15. Okay, look, you don't need me to tell you that this guy had a great year. The work speaks for itself.
This one's for all the little dreamers and the ones who never gave a fuck. I'm a product of the tube and the free lunch. Living room watching old reruns. And who cares? Your daddy couldn't be here. Mama always kept the cable on. I'm a product of the tube and the free lunch. Living room watching old reruns.
You know, I still contend that this album was not released at the right time. If Anderson .Paak had dropped Malibu in, say, mid-May, it could have ruled the summer for everyone and not just me. But really, if that's the biggest flaw I can find with the project, that is saying a lot, because this record was relaxed, groove-heavy, relentlessly catchy, and features one of the most versatile and potent talents in modern hip-hop and R&B to break in recent memory. The charisma is boundless and infectious. He draws out the best in some of his great guest verses, and I still love the loose framing device to this day on these stories that are detailed and well told. I honestly hope Anderson .Paak makes a record for every part of LA. That's how compelling and well realized it has been in his career thus far. In other words, folks, this is what hip-hop could have sounded like for you in the mainstream in 2016, and yet apparently all you wanted was Drake and an ever-increasing stream of bargain barrel future wannabes instead. You know what? That's your loss. Not mine, because I had this. Number 14. And speaking of artists who deserved far more attention.
You fucking dorks ain't a threat to the cause. There ain't a lesson we can learn from the ostensibly lost. I think it's funny when defendants from identical haunts step out the tempest to measure of what the spectrum involves. Maybe no one cares. Party over here, I'll be over there.
You know, I remember watching The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and seeing Aesop Rock perform for the first time in his 20-plus year career on network television. And aside from once again confirming that Stephen Colbert's taste in musical guests or whoever's booking them was more forward-thinking than you would ever expect, it's almost kind of poignant that Aesop Rock on an album about opening up to his audience and the rest of the world would finally take that step and perform on network TV. You don't need to tell me that the wordplay is incredible, that he's one of the most lyrically dexterous and ingenious rappers working today, that his production work is layered and brilliant in a way that holds its own secrets. But what's all the more amazing than that, this is probably Aesop Rock's most accessible album to date in terms of its hooks and powerful content. I would give this album to people to get them into Aesop Rock. In other words, if he's reaching out to the world, it's about damn time the rest of the world started reaching back, especially when the albums are this great. Number 13. And now we move on to yet another criminally underappreciated album in 2016. And at this point, I'm not just talking about mainstream electronic fans who would probably run screaming from this. No, I'm more stunned that there wasn't more attention from critics who cover electronic music beyond just Pitchfork and, well, me. So for those of you who aren't aware of this, here's an education. I'm not going to deny that Anna Meredith's music is daunting stuff. A classical composer who took modern composition and fused it with experimental electronics, contorting across tempos, tones, nested cadences, and sounds, and yet still with a striking pop sensibility and creating music that you'll want to come back to and explore. There's a lot of effervescent energy to this, coupled with a level of lyrical cohesion that took me completely off guard in the best possible way, and some of the best crescendos and climaxes you'll hear in this genre in 2016. I can comfortably say that Anna Meredith's Varmints sounds unlike anything you will hear before. In this case, definitely an endorsement. Again, I can't promise that you will love this album, but I can promise that you'll remember it. And really, it heartily deserves that chance to blow your mind. Number 12. And on the flip side, sometimes you get records that are exactly what you would expect in terms of composition, content, tones, a whole package. And yet, when you do it this well, you can damn well bet that I'm getting on board.
Yeah, we all live and die. Time will always roll on by. Like an arrow, we will fly. Some stay low and some get high.
You know, in terms of Southern rock, I don't think there's a band that did it better than Blackberry Smoke did in 2016. Mostly because they refined their strengths into a white-hot core of incredibly catchy and potent music. You'd never know this was a self-produced record for as crisp and well-balanced as all the tones are. The hooks are as great as ever, and the writing again proves that Blackberry Smoke might go for broad themes, because you know they're a rock band, but approach them with a hard-bitten maturity and poise that doesn't need to rely on a lot of Southern rock genre tropes that I can't stand. In other words, there tends to be a rock record that's more just straightforwardly kicking ass that lands on these lists, and with Like an Arrow, Blackberry Smoke, they nailed that bullseye. Number 11. I don't think anyone expected this to be this good. Hell, I didn't expect this to be this good, and I like all the artists involved with this collaboration. And again, I don't quite think it's gotten the praise that it deserves, mostly because it's decidedly low-key and subtle. And yet...
While the wholesome things, the ones we make obscene, Latin words across my heart, symbols of infinity, elements so pure, atomic number.
I could easily listen to another half dozen more records from this collaboration project on the strength of this, because the blend of Katie Lang's smoky poise, Nico Case's indie charms, and Laura Veirs' ethereal mystique blends to a project that, again, a little low-key, probably shorter than I would like, but features the best possible versions of all three artists adding their voices to each other's work in order to refine a sound of just pure beauty for me. The production is layered and diverse, the songs are catchy as hell, the harmonies are gorgeous, the writing might share some individual hallmarks of the artist from track to track, but with enough flourishes and refinements to go deeper, and it also happens, again, catchy as hell. This was my go-to summer album, believe it or not. It just got in my head in the best possible way, and ladies, if you happen to be watching, that follow-up, it really can't come fast enough, because this was something special. Number 10. You know, there's a part of me that's surprised that I love this as much as I did. I mean, I have liked this guy's solo work in the past, and his work with his rap collective was always stellar, but this, well, let's just say this, folks, it's on a different level.
I've been living in a fishbowl. Everybody looking, yeah. Looking at the kid go. Doing what they wouldn't, doing what they couldn't. Not beats up, hanging out the window. Yeah. Everybody juking, yeah. Getting up, then we get low. Everybody pushing, yeah.
If you want to talk about experimental hip-hop right now in the underground and you're not talking about Sims, you're doing it wrong. He might not have the same wild personality in his delivery like a Danny Brown does, but so much of the quivering, off-kilter, bizarre production go toe-to-toe with Danny Brown, and certainly bang as hard. Just like every member of Doomtree, Sims gets that you can make insightful, brilliantly lyrical hip-hop while still delivering some monstrous hooks, and more than ever, it pushes that even harder, tapping into personal territory that Sims has rarely touched upon in the same way. Powerfully honest and sincere, genius in so many subtle ways, and a banger that should send the mainstream cowering. It's one of the best hip-hop releases of the year, hands down. Rest of Doomtree, Sims raised the stakes with this. I want to hear some competition. Number 9. So yeah, again, I didn't quite explore as much black metal throughout this year as I wanted to. And considering I actually covered more albums this year than in 2015, that is indeed saying something. But hey, sometimes you find a project in the margins, one that winds up in your radar practically by accident and ends up kind of blowing your mind. Okay, look, I will freely admit that just like with Panopticon blending in elements of bluegrass and country that won me over, Sayore, they had a foot in the door thanks to their usage of Celtic folk. But it takes some damn impressive craftsmanship to match those instrumental tones with atmospheric black metal and make it feel like more than just a gimmick. And with Guardians... Look, I don't know what to tell you. Some of these melodies are among some of the most viscerally satisfying that I've heard this year. The tonal balance is the best that it's ever been with real instrumental diversity. The lyrics and vocals are solid as hell. Transitions are masterful. But really, at some point, it all comes back to the tunes, to the melody, and Sayore, they delivered some of the absolute best. It's an incredible fusion, an incredible album, definitely worth your time if you're into black metal, or even if you're not, it's special. Number 8. Okay, I'm a little amazed how big this album got, and not just for me. I mean, I've been a fan of this guy for a couple of years now, and frankly, I'd argue this is not his best work. Probably his last album was. But this record has rapidly become the, I don't like country, but I like this, which is probably linked to it being the furthest that this artist has ever stepped away from country. And yet, it's one of the cases where the success is so justly earned, I can't complain.
They're sitting out on them high seas, feels just like a being born. But that first port call in Thailand feels like a pollywog turning 19. They got king cobras fighting in boxing rings, and all the angels play Connect Four.
So this got a nomination for Album of the Year at the Grammys, a fact that still makes no sense to me, and also a promising sign that Sturgill Simpson will get a huge primetime performing slot, which, yeah, that's awesome. But I think it's important to stress how he got to this point, with one of the best country-adjacent projects of the year, easily. Yeah, the elements of soul and rock can feel a little bit weird, but Sturgill Simpson's compositions, his serious songwriting chops, and his production skills, yeah, people forget he produced this himself. It makes them all fit seamlessly together, hauling back that Muscle Shoals sound back to the limelight with tremendous success, coupled with the most daring Nirvana cover I think I've heard in years, and the fact that Sturgill has sworn to keep on experimenting in the future. Look, if it's this amazing, I'm definitely along for the ride, so yeah, check this out, it's fantastic. Number 7. So now we have the other Grammy-nominated record for Album of the Year on this list. Frankly, a little stunned there's 2 here, but okay, the Grammys get things right occasionally. But I think I'm more surprised not that the Grammys nominated this, but that it made my list, because I was pretty outspoken against this artist before 2016. She has had multiple songs land on worst hits list from me, and yet...
Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose. Yeah. Freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too. I break chains all by myself. Won't let my freedom rot in hell. Hey, I'ma keep on running 'cause the winner don't quit on themselves.
Look, I would be hard-pressed to find the critics who didn't like Beyoncé's Lemonade. Even a lot of the people who hate Beyoncé couldn't help but admit that this was actually pretty damn great. And for me, I was always kind of indifferent to her, but Lemonade was on a different level. The genre bending and the experimentation, the willingness to embrace rougher sounds and tones, the fact that Beyoncé was willing to rip away the veneer of American pop culture royalty to find and ultimately embrace the flaws in it, are some of her best songwriting with guest stars that just blew me away. Oh, and also happens to be Beyoncé's best ever vocal performance of her career, hands down, bringing a level of raw intensity I did not believe she could pull off. But again, you all know this. Lemonade was a pop culture phenomenon, and while it's probably going to snatch the Grammy away from Sturgill, I'd argue in this case, it's kind of worth it. I just wish the hits had stuck around a little longer, but you know what? I predict more than probably any other album on this list, Lemonade will have stuck around in the pop culture consciousness. Just watch. Number 6. This is my favorite hip-hop album of the year. It's not the flashiest, it's not the most dense or experimental, although it is pretty dense, but it is by far the smartest and the most emotionally resonant, with the sort of storytelling and vulnerability that still managed to be insightful and, yeah, funny as hell. And again, it's not quite certain that it's his best work, considering I've covered some albums that he's done that are really great, but the fact that it landed on this high, it's definitely a testament to its quality, because it's great.
I'm focused enough to knit a whole sleeper quilt and train tunnels moving through people like a Peterbilt. I found what all of my confident voices are. I'm feeling free, 20 pounds on my Oyster card. Gone ahead with my Dwayne Wayne looking ass. I want a stupid mic stand carved from a wooden staff. I'm trying to relive days that I couldn't grab. I looked up what Lena Dunham said and I shouldn't have.
You know, I get the impression this album was a very slow burn for a lot of people. The sort of record that at first didn't attract a lot of attention, but going on months later has developed a much bigger following and people have jumped on board. And deservedly so, and not just because Paul White proves to be an absolute genius behind the production boards and crafting beats and weird ideas that stick with you and you can somehow rap over, but the star, Open Mike Eagle himself, taking us through the little stories through a day that explores insecurities, alcohol abuse, technology, and the little complicated moments and motions that inform being a black man in America. It's so unbelievably clever and funny that you almost miss how nakedly sincere and powerful and sad it can become in the details. Perfectly framed and amazingly nuanced with so many quotable lines. Look, Open Mike Eagle made my list in 2014 with Dark Comedy, pretty high on that list too. And while I do think that album is a little bit better, I still absolutely love this project. Hella personal for sure, but also a work of genius. Number 5. And yet, if we're looking for a songwriter to go toe-to-toe with Open Mike Eagle when it comes to that nuance and that detail, well, of course they're gonna go to country, a parallel genre to hip-hop in so many ways that a lot of people don't tend to realize. And while it was one of the real treats of the year to dig into this woman's extremely rich discography, I think this was the crowning moment.
Something down on the ground won't let her out, it holds her in. And he's afraid if she flies, she'll never come home again. Something about the bird in her spreading those wings.
You know, I could engage in some very healthy debate whether or not Lori McKenna's The Bird and the Rifle is her best album or how it compares with Bittertown or Lorraine. But you know what, I'm not gonna make that comparison, half because the majority of her albums are absolutely brilliant and deserve your attention and your money, but also because this album is a tour de force without comparison. Dave Cobb delivers some of his most restrained production to date and knows how to get out of the way of genius songwriting, because Lori McKenna knows how to write the songs that feel lived in. All the more powerful because of the little details that don't shy away from an occasionally dark and melancholic reality where things didn't all work out the way they should have. Again, I'm not sure this album is for everyone. There's a level of maturity and understated poise that I think will not get the appreciation as louder, more accessible work will. But for me, I'm hard-pressed to find a lot better. This album really got to me. This, along with the next two albums, very nearly got the highest possible scores on this channel for me. That's how much they connected. In other years, they could easily top a list. And on that note, number 4. This was the most fun album I heard all year. And yeah, the fact that it's number 4 says a lot about the general mood of 2016, but man, it deserved to be so much bigger than this, because it's so rare that you take the blend of styles and the influences this guy does and pull something that so blows above nearly all of it and sticks the landing, especially on a debut. And yet from this guy, we finally got it.
Lady of the Ark, I think I found a part. I think I found a piece of what you used to be. Dozing in the back of a funeral car and tangled in the blankets of your memory. So why did I waste you? If I'd have felt that love come to fall.
And to think I effectively found this album by accident browsing through Pitchfork, the sort of oddity that I don't think anyone was expecting, but certainly won its fair share of people over. Every single person I've shown this to, which is basically anyone who will listen, has loved this. Mostly because it's a southern gothic blend of glam rock with a titan of a frontman. Not only is Kyle Craft one of the most impressive and powerful singers I've heard fresh in years, the fact that his songs are so ridiculously melodic, well mixed, and well written blows me away, with a penchant for over-the-top, colorful detail have these minds from equal parts Bob Dylan, early 70s Bowie, early Meatloaf, and Nick Cave. Now that might seem like a bit of a retro choice, but the framing is updated and modernized in the best possible way. It really fits the thematic arc of the album, and I cannot wait to see what this guy delivers next. It's absolutely stellar work from a killer debut. Seriously, check this guy out, give him your support. He deserves it. Number 3. If I'm going to talk about regrets this year, it would be that I didn't really have a chance to review this properly. Oh, I did review it while I was on vacation in Spain, and then I did a recap video afterwards. I actually filmed that review outside my Airbnb in Barcelona. And yet this came at a very complicated time in my life and got under my skin in a way that not only guaranteed its spot on this list, but also that it would go down as really an all-time favorite of mine. And she did it by making the least country album of her career, and also her best.
And I know just how she feels, 'cause I know just where
Yeah, I said it. This is Lydia Loveless's best album. Look, I love The Indestructible Machine, but Real is playing at much more complex and powerful territory. It's an album about relationships, falling apart mostly, but rarely have I ever seen songwriting that captures the emotional complexity at their roots that feels both modern and yet relevant to any situation, damn near timeless. The melodies and hooks, they're stunning. The production is ridiculously on point, especially considering how far this album ventures into uncharted territory outside of the genre. And Lydia Loveless's delivery is jaw-dropping in its intensity and subtle power. And look, no, I don't think I'll ever be able to properly separate this record from a very turbulent time for me emotionally this year. So raise all the questions about objectivity that you want, I get it. But look, I can't deny the straightforward quality, raw beauty, and power of an album like this. And those experiences just cemented what was already there on this album, because it really is something special. In any other year, this album probably would have topped my list, but 2016 was not any other year. As such, number 2. Again, I want to stress that we're kind of in uncharted territory for this channel on these lists. This is the first year I ever gave a perfect score, and I ended up giving 2. Believe me, I'm as floored as anybody else is. And as such, I don't know how to rank these albums. Not only do they do different things, but they tap into very different emotions, and they will become classics for entirely different reasons. They're in different genres altogether. And when you get to that point, there's no real reason to rank them. It's a big reason I don't have a favorite album of all time or can structure that list. Most because the albums that have perfect scores in my books, they're all in their own lane. But I did want to set some sort of ranking for consistency on this list. I didn't want to give you guys a tie that would drive you crazy. And here it is.
Right across the sea. But the echo comes back empty.
I'm in awe of this album. It's a sort of artistic achievement that I have a hard time believing exists, not just because of the heartbreaking circumstances of its creation, but because Nick Cave was able to translate all of that without fear or holding anything back. Even without that context that you all know, this album would have chilled me to the bone all the same. This is a master storyteller, a giant among men in the tales and the music that he's woven, a legend in music and rock, yet crushed back to earth and forced to confront mortality in its worst possible manifestation. And the fact that he not only reached some vestige of imperfect resolution, but in an album that transcends genre and is unlike any experimental rock record you will hear this year. Yeah, classic. And not since The Good Son has Nick Cave made something this powerful. Hard for me not even get chills when I watch or read reviews of the album. That's how much it cut for me. That's how much it stuck with me throughout the course of this year, ever since I heard it. It's not an easy listen by any stretch. It still gets to me every time I think about it, talk about it, listen to it. But my God, worth it. Best possible way. And finally, number 1. At the end of the day, when it came down between this and Nick Cave, look, both albums for me are effectively classics. They're milestones in the artist's career that raise the bar to a level that I'm not sure they will ever pass again, by them or by a very scant list of artists with their talent. And in a twisted parallel, those two albums share a lot in common. They're understated, they're restrained, they don't stand out a lot. They're powerfully emotional and dealing with deaths in the family, all while finding some vestige of imperfect closure at the very end. And thus, when you're stuck comparing records that to me I can't find flaws with them, the only thing you can really compare is something that has never really been a factor in my rankings: cultural and historical impact. Because while Nick Cave, he made a classic within the scope of his career, Dave Cobb, he did it for the entire genre.
That's alright, that's alright, that's alright, that's alright. Since my soul's got a seat up in the kingdom, that's alright.
It was my most anticipated album of 2016, and it lived up to all of my expectations and then went past them, and did it by being a compilation project that takes each artist to their zenith. John Paul White sounds better than he ever has at the Civil Wars. Jason Isbell's writing is witty and top-notch. Morgane Stapleton proves to be the equal of her husband on a cover that still amazes me to this day that they pulled that off and made it work. Zac Brown shows exactly why country is his first love. Jamie Johnson reminds us that we still need that next album, Jamie. Brandy Clark broke my heart yet again. And Miranda Lambert? Well, you could argue that this project and her connection with the fellow artists on this project, Anderson East, pushed her career in the best possible direction going forward. It's already having transformative power and changes. The thematic richness of these stories, perfect in their intimacy and timeless with their resonance, and with the masterful production touches of Dave Cobb, it proved to be the masterpiece that more than lives up to its inspirations. Again, it's a subtle record, which has caused some critics to dismiss this as overhyped, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense at all, mostly because hype implies a lot of inflated buzz and a temporary moment of popularity that it won't last. And while there are many things about this album that might not stick around, the artists, the promise of independent country that this album has further spurred and encouraged and picked up all the more momentum in 2016, leading to one of country music's best years in a long time, even the critics who talk about it, we're all gonna fade away. But the stories, the resonant connections, those last forever. And even if they don't, as the album heralds in its final glorious moments, it'll be alright. It'll all be alright. Without a doubt, for me, best album of 2016, and will probably go down as one of my favorites of all time. 2017, the bar's been set. Have a happy new year, folks, and I'll see you next time.